Welcome to DEFN episode number 80, I guess. we're at 80. And we are going east again in this episode and, going to my my home country, as I say, motherland. And Netherlands is my fatherland now. No parental association.
It's where your nethers are, isn't it?
Yes, my nethers are in Netherlands now. I can't move it anymore. Literally, my ass, is in the Netherlands now. Anywho, welcome to DEFN, episode number 80. And this is me, Indian guy in the Netherlands, and we have all the way from Belgium.
Yeah, well, I think the DEFN is an octogenarian, so am I. So, let's carry on.
And then we have our special guest joining us at an ungodly hour from amazing country, the incredible India. Vedang, welcome to the episode.
Hello, guys.
Hi there. So let's get started. Let's get a deep dive into Indian culture. And before, I think last time we did one Indian episode, if you can call it. So we started with asking, what is your favorite dish and favorite dessert and all that stuff. So I think we should start with food, obviously, right? Because India, food, better food than Netherlands, obviously, maybe even Belgium,
All the things I prepared to talk about, this was not one of them. I mean, yeah, I can talk about food for sure, but it's not like some smart answer. There's a sweet called ukdiche modak, which I just had recently, which is quite good. Which is very Puneri sweet, coconut-based filling, which is absolutely delicious. And I think anyone who comes to India should definitely come to Maharashtra to try that out.
You should explain the words, right? Because you're assuming that people know what is Puneri means. What is Puneri?
So Pune is the city that I live in, that I've grown up in, and in India, like any part of India you go, the food is going to be drastically different. So the range is just like incredible. So I am from the state of Maharashtra, and the cuisine is Marathi here, and the dish that I named, which is ukdiche modak, basically a very bad bastardized translation would be steamed momos, which they are not. but that would be like a close comparison. They are sweet, and they're had at specific festivals. They are supposed to be Ganesha's favorite dish. So Lord Ganesha, Ganpati, and that's basically the event when they are made most often.
Ooh.
So there was a festival last week, was there?
No, there was just me having a craving last week.
Right, okay.
So yeah, it wasn't. It's not necessarily just for the festival, but it's definitely had during the festival.
Yeah. So you don't need a reason to eat, sweet stuff in India. You just keep munching on them every day.
Right.
Nice.
Okay.
Cool. On that sweet note, I think Vedang, it's by the way, it's really a very nice name. I like that. It's abstract enough, but it is also concrete enough, right? It's like it's just saying like Vedang is not specifying which Veda you are, but also saying you're part of something. So cool name, by the way.
What does it mean then? Because I don't get that. So what's
Vedang? So in India, a lot of the names have meaning. I don't know if this is true in the Netherlands or in Belgium. I don't know if names have...
Oh, you don't want to know Netherlands names.
Okay. So Vedang basically is somebody who knows, who encompasses the body of the four Vedas. The four Vedas are the founding texts of Hinduism.
Right,
and,
okay.
Yeah, so Vedang, if you just break it up, the word, it's basically just Veda plus Anga, and Anga is body, and Veda is Vedas. So the body of the Vedas, basically. So that's the name. That's the meaning of the name.
Okay, so you're kind of like the equivalent of the Bible in the West, like the 4 books of the Bible. You're the 4 books of the Hindu religion.
So if you get into the number of books in the Hindu religion,
yes, we're gonna
Yeah.
spend a lot of
lot
time.
of time right here. So there
Okay.
are 4 Vedas, then there are the 2 mythologies, which is Mahabharata and Ramayana. Then there are 18 Mahapuranas, and I do not know
Okay.
how many Upanishads are there. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think
So
around 32 are the principal ones, and then they say at
Yeah.
least the 1,000 Upanishads and all that stuff. Like,
Yeah,
anyway,
There's a
we'll
bit
get
of
to the
reading
Indian
there.
theology later.
It's
it's
a bit of
yeah.
light
yeah,
reading.
yeah. I think compared to the other religions where it's much easier to have like one book and then finish it off, but I think India is more like a multiple religions. I think Maharashtra would be a different religion, right? Pretty much. If it is not part of the Hinduism, then the Ganesh thing would be a different religion, pretty much.
No, so Maharashtra is majority Hindu, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean most of India is majority Hindu, but Maharashtra is where all the like learned Brahmins and things like. So Pune, for example, has the name Oxford of the East.
Right.
So
Okay.
it
Yeah.
used to be the learning center during the Maratha kingdom, which was century long, 17th century, 18th century, I guess. Yeah, 1700s to 1800s.
So a lot of the educational institutions and churches and temples and stuff are around there.
Yes. Which is
Right.
also the reason why the software industry kind of grew up in Pune. So, I mean, apart from Bangalore, Pune has a pretty strong software industry because of access
Right.
to college students. There are a lot of
Right,
colleges
okay.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it like a university town as well then? Has it got that feel?
Yes.
Or is it too big for
So,
that?
it is now, it's too big for that. But earlier, it used to be a town for people to retire to and for university kids. So
Right.
all the
Get
fancy
away
people
from
from
Bombay.
Bombay, yes, would retire to Pune, and
Yeah.
then university kids would be there to study. And then with
So you
software now, it
retire
has
to
become
Pune
like a bigger.
and then enjoy your life in what is it, Lonavala or the hilly area?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Pune is
Nice.
surrounded by hills on all sides, basically.
Ah, right.
So
Okay. So it's like the Rome of India.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Okay.
okay.
Yeah, but it's nice. It's a nice countryside and lakes and because I guess you're not near the beach.
No
I don't
beach
know.
in Pune,
I don't know
but-
the geography. You know.
No. I mean, mountains on all sides, no beach, and it
Is
used to
there-
be
is there-
like nice strolling countryside,
Is there
but not
skiing?
anymore. No.
Well, there is if you travel, north enough.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Not in Pune.
Not in Pune.
Yeah,
no.
not in Pune,
No,
probably.
I'm joking about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I know enough geography to know that.
Cool.
Right.
So, I think let's obviously we'll come back to all these topics again and again during the course of our discussion. So let's dive into Vedang, you because this is Clojure podcast, and then we'll get back to Clojure at some point or maybe now.
Great.
So let's talk about your journey. Like, so where do you work and how did you get into Clojure? The from 1700s until now. How is the knowledge has been transformed? Let's hear everything.
Great. You will actually like this story, Vijay. So,
one member of
Nice.
the audience will. That's good.
Yes.
Don't tell me. Has it got anything to do with Emacs?
Absolutely.
Oh fuck. Okay.
So I was a C,
Isn't that a dead
C
giveaway when they
programmer.
say I'm going to like it? That's like
Yeah.
now you know where this is going.
Welcome to the Emacs section of this episode.
So I was a C programmer, C++ programmer, and systems engineering was a big thing when I was in college, actually. So most of the jobs in Pune used to be around systems, and I had a job in Semantic. But everybody there used Visual Studio, and my mentor in college had taught me Emacs, and I was very stubbornly an Emacs person. And I was
So you
coming up
started
to
on the right foot, man. You started on the right
Absolutely.
foot.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very strongly of that opinion. So I was coming to a point in life where I didn't want to just copy paste Emacs configuration anymore. I actually wanted to understand what I was doing. And like I was at that point tinkering in my life where I wanted to really understand Lisp. Now, at that point in time, there happened to be a company called Infinitely Beta, which one of my classmates was working in. And this was a bunch of common Lispers who had. So there was a company called Cleartrip in India. There is a
Oh
company
yeah,
called
yeah. That's
Cleartrip.
one of the
Yeah.
famous examples of Lisp companies in India.
Yeah. So Cleartrip
Yeah.
was, I guess, similar to Expedia, you could say,
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
listeners.
Mhm.
And it was really fast and beautiful. And the engine was common Lisp.
Mhm.
And they were in the process of rewriting everything to Java because they had grown big.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
so these guys left that company and they started their own new company called Infinitely Beta. And the change they made, this was by Shampayan Ghosh and Aditya Deshmukh and Nandan Bagchi and people like that. The change they
Mm.
made was that they moved from Common Lisp to Clojure. And
Ah.
that was when, so this was in 2009. Clojure was fairly new at that time. And
Yeah.
they moved from Common Lisp to Clojure because it was on the JVM. They just had the experience of people telling them that JVM is the future, like not like we want to move to JVM. So they said, let's start out with a Lisp which is on the JVM and let's see where it takes us. So they made this company, and my friend reached out to me, and these guys were all Emacs users because there was nothing else for Clojure at that time, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, hey, like I am going to get Emacs Lisp out of this for sure. Whether I get anything else or not, I don't know. So
Finally,
so,
you can configure it yourself, understanding
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So then I joined that company and I loved Clojure. I fell in love with Clojure, and yeah, and I'm still there. The company changed its name from Infinitely Beta to Helpshift.
Mm.
But yeah, so that's basically 2010 to
So
now.
this is so how long is this has been Infinitely Beta / Helpshift? So how long have you been working for them now?
11 years now. So I started in
Oh, cool.
2010 and
Okay.
Right.
the company started in 2009. So
Okay.
yeah.
Nice.
So when I joined,
So
we were like less than 10 people. So
yeah.
So I don't want to
So it's
pander, but do you have a good Emacs setup now?
yes, absolutely.
after 20 years.
Yeah. You've reached enlightenment then, the path towards Emacs enlightenment has been a rocky one by the sound of things, but you're finally getting there.
So
Well, he just said he's the body of knowledge, so he doesn't need additional information from Emacs. I mean, he comes with. In India, we say everything is in Vedas already, So I'm pretty sure eLisp is also in Vedas already. Or at least recursive grammar. I'm pretty sure is there. Anyway,
tinkering with Emacs is like what I do when I'm bored, basically, right? So everyday thing is like, oh, if I'm bored, let's look at some new package, or let's try something else,
and then break everything, and then restore it from
everything.
Git.
Of course, yeah,
yeah, Git reset. Anyway, so it's been almost 10 years of Clojure, and so how did you see Clojure growing or evolving? Let's talk about from Indian perspective, right? I think we were just chatting before we said we'll begin the episode. Like, statistically speaking, just by sheer numbers, for every programming language, there should be more Indians working in them.
Yes.
given the amount of people there. So, how is it there right now? And how did it change in the last 10 years? Putting Clojure at the center.
So when we started, there were very few Clojure programmers in India. We were there, and then I think there was Devashish Ghosh who had written a book called DSLs in Action.
Yeah,
and there was Amit Rathod who
Wasn't
had a
he
company
the
called
Scala
Ruma.
guy though, Devashish?
Yes, yes, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
But his book had a little
Amit
bit of
also
Clojure
wrote
in it
a
also.
book, right?
I think so. Programming in Clojure or something like that. I don't remember the name.
Yeah.
So they were there. And then I think around 2012-13, Nilenso started, which is a consulting firm, which is quite is doing really well even today. And then there were a bunch of C42 was there, which I think also started around the same time, which was bought by Gojek and became the leadership of Gojek. And I believe they were also doing Clojure, though I don't know firsthand, but I think they were also doing Clojure. Staples was there in India for a while. They were hiring out people who were doing Clojure. So it's always been in small pockets. It isn't as non-existent as people think. One of the things that I have seen happening is that a lot of our programmers, so we today we have maybe 30-35 Clojure engineers in Helpshift, and at least 30-35 people have learned Clojure at Helpshift, spent a good 4 or 5 years and graduated. right?
Yeah.
And moved on to other companies. And these guys
Yeah.
have moved on to a lot of places in Europe and
Mm.
outside India. So that's another,
Mm.
the number of Indians doing Clojure probably is larger than is immediately obvious. There just
Yeah.
aren't great big examples in India that we can say that, okay,
Yeah.
here is a giant
Right,
company
right.
that's Clojure. Like,
So it's
we
more
don't have a
spread
new
out
bank.
around Indian diaspora rather than just continent, subcontinent of India.
That's right. That's
So
right.
there
Yeah.
is, yeah. Okay. And how is um, specifically in India, for example, um, is the Clojure thing pretty much concentrated in and around Pune, Bombay metropolitan area? Do you have different companies doing in Bangalore or maybe in the north, in Noida or Delhi or Calcutta? And how is it there?
I know of a bunch of people who are doing Clojure in Pune and Bangalore. But
Hmm.
outside of Pune and Bangalore, I'm not very aware. Like, there are a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
companies in Delhi, but Delhi actually is not. It's not something that I am aware of. So I don't know if
yeah,
they are doing Clojure or not.
yeah.
So I mean, one of the things it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess a lot of maybe I'm mischaracterizing this, but I think a lot of Indian work is kind of like contracting to European companies or American companies. So I guess some of the tech choices are driven by those companies rather than necessarily by the employees that are working for them. So
Yes,
is
yes,
that one of the kind of reasons why the kind of like homegrown Clojure community isn't as big as you
yes,
might
yes,
expect? I don't
absolutely. So product companies are in their infancy in India.
know.
So India was mainly services industry for a while,
Yeah.
and today we have a lot of big product companies, but you can think of them as copies of successful product companies in the US, right?
Mm.
So US has Amazon, we have Flipkart. US has Uber, we have Ola, things like that, right? Big companies
Yeah.
which have copied successful models. I think we are at a point in life where you'll soon start seeing Indian companies, product companies, which are coming up just to solve Indian problems.
Yeah.
So then, like, I think that focus will shift a little bit more towards more esoteric languages. So I
Mm.
know for sure that, like, I know people who are working in Erlang and Haskell and Elixir, and these languages have a little bit of adoption in India. It's not that they are completely non-existent, but we don't have, like, you won't. I at least I don't. I'm not aware of, like, open source stuff coming out of here or people giving talks about it or driving the direction of any such thing. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's missing.
Yeah. And I think for Haskell, I remember reading about one company from Chennai called Hasura or something. I think they were doing like a Haskell container stuff, something like that. I think I was really happy to see like, oh, there is Haskell stuff in India, like super cool.
Right.
So I think because we're talking about different product companies and everything, it'll be nice, to explain what you guys do, like your product, what kind of product you're building, and what does Helpshift mean, and when did it break the infinite beta and then became
Yeah.
became RC and then product?
Okay. So what Helpshift is the business terminology for it is in-app CRM. So basically,
Mhm.
we provide an SDK to mobile app developers, and the pitch is that if you're an app developer and you think your end user is going to have a problem and they're going to need help, then you need our SDK in your app, right?
Mm.
So this SDK provides an interface, a WhatsApp-like interface to the end user. When the end user says, "I want help," he gets a chat interface and he chats with the support agents on the other side, right? And the support agents on the
Okay.
other side get a Gmail-like interface where all these issues are coming up and they're answering the problems. So that's like the simple, what do you say, 1,000-degree view of the whole
Yeah.
Yeah.
product,
Yeah.
right? Uh, how we got here from infinitely beta is like a long story. We did a bunch of pivots and we tried a few things. We started out doing something called paisa.com, which
Mhm.
was going to be for portfolio management.
Mhm.
And then we had, like, we found we could not compete with the existing incumbents like Money Control and stuff like that, because they had
Yeah. Yeah.
real financial advisors and media teams and things like that,
Right.
which we did not have. And then, so we said, how do we compete with this? And at that time, Quora was really big in India. So
Mhm.
what we did was we said, okay, let's create a Quora like thing for Pesa where people can like help each other by asking questions and answering questions.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So we created something called Ask, right? Ask Pesa,
Mhm.
and that became like quite popular. And then our investors said that, hey, like this is a great thing. You should just do this for the enterprise, right?
Mm.
So
Right.
then we moved into something like Quora for enterprise,
Yeah.
which also I think there was a company called Yammer which was also doing something similar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then from there, the whole thing was that, okay, what is needed is like customer support. Like when people come to enterprise, they really want customer support, and there are too
Yeah.
many solutions on the web that are already doing this, right?
Mm.
But nobody's doing it for mobile apps. This was in like 2012,
Mm.
and mobile apps were like, they weren't even that big of a thing in India at that time.
Mm.
So I remember the co-founders of the company, they went to the US and then they came back and they're like, the future is mobile apps and everybody's going to be
Yeah.
doing mobile apps and we need to be doing support for mobile apps. And that's basically when we pivoted. And that was where I think we found product market fit. So we kind of
Mm.
really found revenue and product market fit there, and we kind of started growing. So we have stayed
Nice.
with that for the last 8 years.
Yeah. So
Excellent.
it's pretty a long time thinking in terms of Clojure's adoption and evolution, right? If you started in almost like 2009, 2010, let's say 2010, that's I think that was still when well, we didn't have Cider, it was still Slime, I think.
Yes, Slime and Swank.
Emacs with Slime. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Leiningen just started up, or maybe even Leiningen wasn't there. I'm not sure because when I started, it was still Clojure main, so there was no Leiningen. So, how did your tech stack evolve over the period, and how old is your code?
It's
Is there something that hasn't been touched for 10 years and then it's still
yes,
there?
there are things which have not been touched for 8 years at least.
Mm,
So
wow.
what happened was, so these pivots kind of were like resets, right? So we could just throw everything away and start from scratch. So those were
Yeah.
like great points for starting with new technology,
Mm,
and then adopting things like Line Engine and all the new things that started coming up, protocols and stuff like that, right? But once we found product market fit, then there wasn't there was no going back and resetting and starting from scratch, right?
Right.
So there are
yes.
parts of the code which are old and have not been touched, they just work. And that's testament to Clojure's strength as well. Actually, you can just keep upgrading Clojure and things will just continue working, right? uh,
Yeah.
so we don't, like, today we are a Line Engine focused uh, company. Like we don't do depth or Eden, right? Because we
Yeah.
have not found a way to adopt it so far. Like things just work for us. So that is
Yeah.
one of the problems that you have with like long running code bases, where you kind of get stuck in the patterns of the time when you were doing this work. Like you need conscious thought to move towards newer stuff, which can be hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe it's also a question of, because everything's kind of working for you, there has to be enough of a payback to justify the investment.
Exactly.
And I
Yes.
guess if you're starting from scratch, you might look left and might look right, and you can make a choice. But if you've already committed to something, then why change? Really, you have to have a good reason.
That's absolutely right. That's actually, it's really hard to make a good business case for like trying out new tooling when the old one works perfectly fine. So
Yeah.
that's something that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only for me, the only thing that I thought that, I mean, not the only thing, but there was the major thing that Deps.Eden brought was this ability to depend on a Git SHA rather than a Maven artifact. And again, if you don't need that, then it's difficult to go to that next level.
With
Yeah.
Leiningen, you can do that now, right? I mean, you can also do that with Leiningen. I think there is
I
a
mean,
plugin or something.
no,
I'm
I mean,
sure.
we have just never felt the need for it, right? So if you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
do local development, then Line Engine has that with like local install and class. What is it
Yeah.
called?
Class
Class
path being
checkouts,
pointing to
checkouts. Sorry,
something. Yes.
checkouts.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So those things are there, and
Mm.
if you are ready to publish an artifact, you're ready to publish an artifact. So you generally don't want to pull from a Git SHA.
Mm.
So that I mean, we haven't hit that use case. I'm sure there are people who have, but we haven't.
sure,
Yeah. Yeah. And so because you're almost like 35 people, and obviously pretty much everybody working in Clojure, and how difficult has it been to find I cannot say Clojure programmers because, as you mentioned, like there are not many Clojure programmers available in India. Uh, how did you transition people into writing Clojure code, especially when you have a, I'm assuming, reasonably large code base that you have, entire company running on Clojure. So how did you find people? What kind of attributes that you look for to bring them into Clojure?
That's actually a great question. So we have around 70 engineers actually, but we have a big
Oh.
SDK team, big front end team. They don't do Clojure.
Wow. Okay.
So Clojure is only on the back end and in the
Mhm.
data platform basically. We in so many years of existence, we have not been able to hire anyone who already knew Clojure. Like we just haven't found them. So we
I
have
have to apply them.
a lot of
I
people
know a
have
little
come
bit of
to
Clojure.
us. A lot of people have come to us who are interested in learning Clojure. So they've approached us because they want to learn it, and that has happened. But in most cases, it's just people who want to work, and then we have to train them, we have to teach them. Uh, so it was very hard for us to find senior engineers. So we went down the path of just hiring out of college and growing engineers. So we have spent a lot of like our time on onboarding and mentoring and teaching as a full-time job and fleshing that out, that aspect out. And
Yeah.
it's a long investment and it pays off, but because like people get molded according to the culture, they really have that ethos and things like that. But
Yeah.
it's a big problem with Clojure for us, which is that it isn't easy to just say, okay, let's hire 5 more people. It just doesn't happen.
Hey, I have the pun now. So you're helping people shift into Clojure.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
that should be.
Yes, we
I
have
just
done
thought
that.
about it. Nice. But
So is that
is,
something?
yeah.
So before we move on, I mean, is that you say you can't like just hire 5 people that program Clojure. So is that constraining you, or do you find like within a fairly short period you can get people on board and they're productive, or what's the story there?
So we have really worked hard on our onboarding. So I remember earlier it used to be like 6 months for somebody to be productive, because that at that time, in a point in time, they had to learn Emacs and Clojure, right? So yeah, so that was just like
And they're set for their life.
So
correct.
that's not a prerequisite then. You must know Emacs. If you don't know Clojure, that's fine. But if you don't know Emacs, fuck off. It's like
one of these philosophical schools. I think it's probably Aristotle school or something. There used to be a sign, or at least they say that there used to be a sign. Let nobody enter who doesn't know geometry or something. So your company has a thing like let nobody enter who doesn't know Emacs.
Yeah. So because there wasn't tooling outside of Emacs for Clojure at that point in time.
Yeah.
Right,
For a long
right,
time.
yeah.
And then we had like IntelliJ, Cursive, and now we have VS Code, and a lot of the new people prefer that and they use that. So we cut down that onboarding time from 6 months to 3 months. From 3 months, currently it stands at like 1.5 month, where people join the company and then they are productive.
So if I can just summarize, then Emacs is not very productive, and Cursive and VS Code is very productive. That's what we're kind of summarizing that, yeah.
No, the thing they cut down is on the Clojure onboarding, not Emacs onboarding. So Emacs onboarding was always a week. Rest of the time was because of the Clojure tooling support.
I don't know about that. It seems like it's going from 3 months to 1 month, and that's more than a week. But okay, I'm not a mathematician. Fair enough.
So the way I look at it is that Emacs is like the really steep curve that you have to take time to learn, and then you can fly for the rest of your life.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's basically the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Okay. So
what is
we've got better tooling now. That's good.
Yeah. So better onboarding. We focused quite a bit on that. But it's hard to get senior engineers, right? Because they, like, one part of senior engineers is they rarely want to change their tech stack, because
right.
I have invested 8 years of my life in this. Why should I change to something else? Blah blah blah. Right. So that's one thing, which is it's hard to convince them to try something new, and that when you learn this, it's going to change your life, or you're going to find something worthwhile to learn here. Right. So that's hard. And then it's a matter of like they have to stick around for them to make an impact. So they have to onboard, they
Yes.
have to really like
Yeah,
learn new
yeah.
things. So yeah, it's hard for sure. It's hard.
It's a bit of a humbling experience, basically, isn't it? And but I think most for me, if you get a good senior engineer who kind of really knows the landscape of technology, then the language should be a small part of that, really. Because a lot of the domain of computing is not in a particular stack or in a particular language, is it?
Right. So there are few people who will say that, okay, these are challenging problems that I want to solve, and
Right.
and then they'll do it in whichever language they need to do it in, right? But that is not like my experience so far. Like in terms of hiring, it's a little bit hard to convince people about these things.
Yeah.
They really have to see that it will be great for them, that it will be
Yeah.
something that, and I think this is a problem with Clojure in general that the Clojure community kind of needs to talk about, which is when there was hype around Clojure, we did not have this problem, right? Because people would say that, hey, like I'm going to spend some time learning this and it's going to go on my resume and I'm going to get lots of job offers from lots of big companies, right? But now that Clojure is not like the cool kid on the block, that kind of is hard as a selling point, right? So I think Clojure has joined the family of like Haskell and Erlang and things like that, where it's not the
I think
Java.
it makes sense in a place like India or anywhere else. I mean, because even here, if I say, okay, come and work in Clojure for me, then people are thinking about the next job as well, right? Because if I'm in India, for example, there are like 4 companies that I can apply for versus 20,000 companies that I can get my career by writing Java. Then it's kind of a no-brainer to see that, okay, I'm going to spend 2 years on a language which I can only move from Helpshift to Nilenzo to Gojek, and that's pretty much it, my limitation. And if I do Java, then there is practically, per street there are like chai wala jaisa, like there is just tea stall level software companies. There are so many, so it's also like a career thing, right? And that would be my guess. Like, I'm gonna invest, learn new language, and I have to relearn or unlearn all the stuff that I have so far,
Right.
and it feels like a retrograde than I'm progressing in my career. So that could be one reasons, I think.
Yeah. So we have to like tell them that, hey, like the things you learn here will help you in whichever programming language you are going to use, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that kind of sticks, like that. People like I have had people come to me and say that, okay, I really agree with you. Like this is something that's changed my life, even in Java, like not just in Clojure, but even in like this immutability and everything being data driven. These two are really strong points. So they aren't really something that Java developers are used to.
Yeah, but I think it's also helps. It also helps that other languages also started talking about functional programming, especially Java. The lambdas coming in, and because at one point all this functional programming was just Haskell or Scala a little bit, and then Clojure pretty much, right? And the quote unquote mainstream languages like Java or even Rust, and well, Rust is pretty new, but other languages are not talking about functional programming that much. But then suddenly there was a bit of a slow how do you call upgrade of these languages into functional paradigms, and then you see the patterns everywhere, like, oh, okay, now what I'm learning here is going to be useful there.
I think event driven paradigm, the growth of event driven systems kind of brought this about, right? So this renewed interest in functional programming, because event driven also has this data flowing through functions kind of a feel to it. And in fact, like I find, so we didn't consciously choose an event driven architecture, we just ended up at it in Helpshift because of the way that we wrote our Clojure code. Like that's something that was quite interesting for me to look back on. So initially when we wrote our Clojure code, it was so bad. It was so bad because we took this whole functional thing to the whole extreme case, right? Where even like database updates were wrapped in individual functions. So you would have individual functions which were doing updating individual parts of documents, which was the stupidest thing that anybody has ever like done. Right. And then we were like, dude, this is like terrible. why are we doing it this way? But
You're like, who wrote this? Oh wait, that's me.
me.
Oh, yeah. Which
So,
idiot thought of this? Oh, I did.
It's
Shit.
God damn it, this is stupid. Okay, git blame. Oh fuck, it's me.
yeah, stop doing it, blame. So anyways, that was, so we wrote, the initial thing we wrote was like a thrush model,
Yeah.
pipelines, basically pipelines in Clojure. And we used to do all the really critical stuff one after the other. And then for all the non-critical things like sending out metrics and sending out the event to some other place and blah blah blah, we used to have like a giant future, which again was a pipeline. So we used to spawn a
Right.
future, and in that future there was again a pipeline, and
Mm.
that caused a lot of problems as we started scaling up.
Yeah.
And then we were like, hey, why are we doing this in the future? We should just like make these independent services and just emit events. And that kind of just like came naturally. And then we figured out that, oh, okay, this is what event driven architecture or event sourcing or
Mm.
all those
Yeah.
things are. So,
So what do you use as a mechanism for transmitting events between services?
Kafka.
You use Kafka,
Mm.
of course you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, I would like to say that we took a bet on Kafka early on. So
Yeah.
I want to just be that we were one of the first ones who were using Kafka out there from 0.8 or 0.6 or whatever Kafka version was the
yeah.
one that was
Pretty early
available.
versions.
Yeah.
So what is with all this experience of large, very large Clojure code base and everything? So can you touch a bit upon both sides of it? Like what is unicorns pooping rainbows? Everything is awesome, and then what is like, okay, this is shit, and this could be way better if we did it in C. So so can you give us the two sides of larger Clojure code base and pain and good
Yeah,
stuff and
absolutely.
then not so good
Absolutely. So on the unicorn side, I think everybody talks about this. REPL-driven development really is like a game changer, right?
Yeah.
And also all the patterns it kind of teaches you to think in terms of data. It really helps with testing. So for example, in our case, one of the surprising ways that we found our developers were testing was that they were just sitting with each other and they were creating these arrays of data, right? Like user logs in, user does blah 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 blah, and then they would just like test it on their machine. Then they would say, hey, this is not working, give the array of data to somebody else or on group chat or whatever, and that other person would run the same test on their machine and say, okay, let me debug this and figure out what's happening. So they built systems for testing which were fully data driven, simply as a side effect of like doing it on the REPL. Right. It wasn't like we realized, hey, this is a great pattern. Like if you write tests like this, they become easily reproducible and easily debuggable, things like that. And so that is like one end of it. One great thing, like when we were a startup, when we were like when we had like 8 nodes, I remember 8 was the limit. I used to be connected to all 8 production REPLs at one time from my Emacs, right? So I have literally had this situation where like our CEO was demoing this in San Francisco somewhere, and something was wrong, and he called up and he said, you guys have written shit code, it's not working, my demo is failing in front of investors, right? And we said, wait, just give us 2 minutes. And we added like defs inside the code and hot patched everything. And then we said, okay, run it again. And then we captured that input and we debugged it, fixed it. Then we said, okay, run it again. It's going to work now. Right. And this was done in like 15 minutes. And the investors were super impressed at like, okay, like this is the pace at which these guys are deploying to production. And so that was, I really miss hot patching in production. I think hot patching in production was a superpower.
So you don't do that anymore.
We couldn't do it, right? I mean, we were at a point where we had made rules like, if you hot patch some code, then you have to announce it and you have to make sure that you create a tag before you go home that day. Right. And the announcement has to be like, hey, I have hot patch code, please don't deploy, because if you deploy, you'll break whatever I have hot patched. It's just not scalable. It can't work.
That's true.
So
I think it's really fun
CI/CD
when you're debugging.
breaks quite a lot.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's fun when you have a system where it's continuously running, and there is the only way to build the system is in the old Lispers way of organically building the whole system. There is always something running, but the world is not the same anymore, I think.
Yeah.
Because you want reproducibility, you want proper history of things, and
Yep.
then it's fun to do. But it's more or less like going into a server and on SSH and then modifying the configuration files, and then at runtime change something in proc file system and then hope that everything is going to work, sort of shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not a thing anymore. So it used to be a thing.
I think the thing is though, I think the thing is that you want developers to be able to develop as if it's production on their local machines, and you can't do that otherwise, can you? You can't do that if you're constantly like using production images and patching production images all the time. It's
exactly.
How do we develop again?
It's a recipe for disaster down the line. So we stopped before we hit some major outage because of it. But
I think REPLs are great for inspecting running systems, though. I mean, I think even if you're not hot patching them, you can still debug them and that kind of stuff much faster than you can do with log files.
We still use this pattern actually. So what we have is we have special nodes where developers can sync their code and they can start a REPL against production data stores, all the production data stores. And then they can do whatever they want on that. And it's a really quick way to like look at data, analyze data, and write migrators or write data requests, fulfill data requests by just making those queries against production. And we trust our developers to be careful, right? I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You have to be careful with it. But
So what are the dark side of such a large Clojure code base being in Clojure?
Oh, so
if
many,
there is any.
so many.
So many. Oh my god,
so many problems. So this REPL-driven development, right?
Fine. Sorry, it's okay.
This is Clojure propaganda. You can't say bad things about Clojure.
Oh my god. So
or challenges,
major problem with REPL-driven development is that without discipline, nobody ends up writing tests, right? Because you just do it in the REPL, it works in the REPL, you move on. And then
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. So we have like large parts of code which have no tests against them simply because somebody wrote it sometime and didn't do anything about it afterwards. And it's a real pain. So that's one example. Another is what you said, Vijay, right? Like this Lisper's tendency to like take a running system and continuously build on top of it.
Yeah.
That leads to like really weird domain specific languages, and nobody other than the person who actually wrote it can understand it 6 months down the line, right? Even the person who wrote it cannot understand it if he has done a bad job there. So this the way I used to talk about it in office, the way we discussed it was, as you're learning Clojure, right? So your mind tends to be continuously blown with all the new things that you're learning. So first you learn about higher order functions, and then you're like, oh, this is great. And then you learn about macros, and then everything you write is a macro, right? And then someday they bite you really bad in the ass, and then you go back to writing functions. And then you're like, okay, the right thing to do is to use macros in like the tiniest bits and make sure that you test them and debug them properly. But then because of that, every person who's learning Clojure, we have to be especially careful to make sure they're not introducing macros left, right, and center. And this comes from like having existing code bases which have a lot of bad macros in them. So that's
I think it's like
first rule of macro club, isn't it?
But it feels like it's a very powerful. That means suddenly you feel like you have this infinite amount of power to do everything, and every problem looks like I can solve this by writing code. Like it's amazing. And at least in Clojure you have some limitations, right? I mean you cannot go all the way like a common Lisp or SBCL, for example. The macros that I see, like every time I read this book called Let Over Lambda, that's like a
crazy
mental like a mental book. Every time I read, like, where exactly am I in this stack? I have no clue anymore. It feels like I'm high and hallucinating, and this like a maze of code generating code.
I have never actually gotten through Let Over Lambda. Like I have never been able to complete it because it just like goes way over my head. That like
trust me. I mean, I keep reading it again and again to understand it better every time. But it's at least in Clojure, what I see is that we don't have that level of quote unquote power that you have in Lisp.
Is it like
So
the Veda of of
yeah,
languages?
it's the impenetrable recursive macro land that once you get in you cannot get out, sort of thing. But
Yeah.
it's a really nice book, though. I mean, I can recommend if you want to have some sort of a mind bending macro magic, macromancy, if we can call that. But it's fun anyway. But that's nice with Clojure, right? I mean, you can't go to that level that you can
You can do
with the whole
plenty
system.
damage. It's pretty bad. So
Yeah,
you don't need to go to that level to write bad code.
Hmm.
I mean, one more. The thing is, so what happens is that these libraries, right? Not just macros. Like even if you take libraries like say core.async or
Hmm.
even component for that matter, right?
Mm.
People, if they come from different programming languages, I mean, I still don't understand lots of parts of Clojure, right? I
Hmm.
still like if I read Joy of Clojure, I'll find something which I like, which will click in a different way today because I'll be like, oh, finally I get this, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
So they come with their own idea of how to write code, and they don't really understand the complexities of these libraries, and you end up with bad code. So
Mm.
unless you have like really enlightened people reviewing stuff all the time, there's a high tendency that these things, specifically I have seen it with core async and component, you can
Hmm.
have really bad code in there which just like just messes up the whole thing, and
Yeah.
makes it really hard to debug, really hard to reason about it under scale, and
Hmm.
very confusing stuff.
And how do you contain these things? Because obviously, these are tools, right? I mean, these are very powerful, and you have to have a sort of a discretion to figure out when to use this one, right? And so, how do you encourage people to reduce their enthusiasm and then use the right tool for the right thing?
So common patterns are really important, right?
Hmm.
So we have like these talks, weekly talks in the office where somebody will talk about some small problem that they have solved, and
Hmm.
the intention behind that is just to like highlight patterns, good patterns, right?
Mm.
Hmm.
So then what you do is you kind of figure out a way to put all this magic stuff, like if you're going to do real magic with core async or with Kafka streams or whatever,
Yeah.
contain that into as small an amount as possible of your
Mhm.
code base and test that part really well, right?
Hmm.
And then make like usable interfaces to do
Hmm.
these things that other people can use, and they can treat them as libraries or they can treat them as recipes which are
Mhm.
already
Hmm.
available to them, right? And use them, and be very strict about, okay, if you're going to step out of this pattern, you need to involve some people. Like don't just write what comes to your mind, like this is a
Yeah.
set pattern. If you genuinely have a use case which does not fit in this pattern, we need to have a discussion
Mhm.
Hmm.
and understand what the next step to take there is. So
Yeah.
that is something that we are doing
Hmm.
to go back and fix all the things that are problematic.
Nice.
So how does that actually work in practice? Do you have like a kind of like what should we say, like a Clojure elders council that where you kind of have the great and the good of Helpshift that can like the Jedi of Clojure, go out there and help to solve the problems?
uh, So we had a monolith code base. We had
Right,
one which
right.
became a giant code base. Today it stands at 500,000 lines, just shy of
Oh, okay.
500,000 lines, some 485,000 lines or something like that
Holy
of Clojure code. Okay, and
shit.
yeah, and then at one point in time, we started building new services. Like we started saying, okay, this thing will be a new microservice, right?
Hmm.
And then the first few microservices that we built, we would just blindly copy code from the monolith. We'd just say, okay, these are things
Right,
we have solved in
right.
there. Let's just copy
Yeah.
it, put it in there, and get on with our lives, right? And then eventually we got to a point where we were like, okay, if we want to fix these patterns, we need to abstract them out into like
Hmm.
libraries
Hmm.
and things like that, which all these microservices can use.
Hmm.
Um, and we need to think about breaking that monolith up into microservices if we want to make it faster or
Hmm.
more
Hmm.
agile.
Hmm.
So today the approach we take is we don't have too many microservices. We don't, because they have their own problems, and
Sure.
that we discovered those as well, right? Because we said let's do
Operational
microservices.
problems, yeah.
Yes, extreme operational problems. So today we do like a modularization within our monolith, right? So we have like this tooling that we have built to say that, okay, this is how you define a module, and this is how you contain code within that module, and this is how you expose an API for this module that other modules can use, and this is a strict dependency graph within these modules that only this type of module can depend on this other type of module, and things like that, right? So, and this is all enforced by external tooling that we have written, right? So that is the happy middle path that we have found. So it isn't easy to pull microservices out of the monolith because there's just too much work involved. And if you're starting new microservices, then we have like some libraries that we're using, and that we are like saying, okay, here are our common patterns. For example, for doing logging, for doing settings, for accessing Kafka. If you're writing Kafka consumers, here are all the patterns you need to know, right? And use these libraries. And within the monolith, here is this modularization technique, and use that, right? So that's basically.
Apropos the monoliths, because I mean, in my experience of kind of like looking at monoliths, the biggest problem with monoliths usually is they have one database and everyone's doing all kinds of shit on it. Or, so it's basically you have readers and writers inside of the monolith, and it's kind of like impossible to pull it apart. But if you're doing kind of like event-driven services, haven't you kind of got the tools to start to pull it apart because you have Kafka in the middle, so you can kind of like.
So we are basically at 35 services right now.
Right.
And that's basically the approach we have taken. Like we have, like I said, we used to have a giant future. Now everything inside that future is going out into its own service, basically. Right. But there are 2-3 problems. One is middleware. So for request response services, which majority of our services inside the monolith are, they all have a common middleware stack, right? So part of it is, first you have to pull the middleware out into its own library, which is a non-trivial problem.
Sure.
Then you have authorization and authentication. So that is a common stack that people are using. And then if you pull all of that out, then you have to think about how these tokens are going to pass between different services and solve that problem, right? Then we have like common utilities for like the way that we do audit trails and the way that we do events. These are all common things which everything in the monolith can just use, but to pull it out into microservice means it has to be something else, right? So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that with so many files of Clojure code, badly written monolith code means that a change in one file can potentially affect lots and lots of other places, right? Because you have like hundreds of files which are each depending on each other in a very badly organized way. So this is something that we kind of surfaced, that we kind of saw when we decided to fix our test timelines, right? So our integration test started taking a lot of time to run. So we said, okay, let's fix it. And the first optimization that we thought about was that let's only run the tests for the files which are modified, right? So now we wrote a little bit of utility which said, okay, here are the files which are modified in the commit, find all the transitive dependencies and only run those tests, right? And
Makes
then
sense,
you discover, that this one file which you have causes you to run all the tests because it's used everywhere. So
that's a good signal, though. Yeah, you can read those signals and kind of see work for yourself.
Yeah, those are great refactoring points, actually. So those are the right places where you need to be refactoring and rewriting your code.
Yeah, that's great. So how do you do that, incidentally? I mean, you said you've written a bunch of tools because, that's kind of interesting. How do you do that? How do you kind of like come to build these tools? Because obviously these are tools for yourself, for your engineering team. They're not like for the customers. So how do you kind of like, how do you motivate yourself to write these tools, and how do you justify to yourself? Or do people just write them and say, I've written this thing, it's better,
Well, honestly speaking, actually, that has happened quite a few number of times where people are just like, hey, like I have done this and it solves this problem, and
Yeah.
please use it, right? Like, I mean, this is horrible.
Good. Yeah.
And I'm glad that that happens. Like, that's really a good thing. But the thing with tooling is that, like, once the problem becomes bad enough, only like then everybody's up in arms. Then they're like, hey, like, I don't want to wait 3 hours for my test run,
Right.
right?
Mm.
It's just like
Yeah.
we have allowed it to get to 3 hours. That's the first thing that we have, like, we shouldn't have done, but we have.
Yeah. Sure.
But
Yeah.
now you have to fix it, and then
Mm.
that pressure builds to say, okay, we really need to, like, put one engineer aside for like 1 quarter and get that person to just focus on this problem and make some improvements there. And
because there's a visible productivity gap, basically, so you can justify it at that point.
yes, absolutely, you can say that, hey, look, these features are going to ship faster because of this, because people are like, they're not going to lose context, which is the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
So we had this like pattern emerging where people would push their commits into review before going home and then go home because the test took so long, right? And that's really bad. That's a disaster.
So what are your, speaking of tools then, what are your workhorses so far? There must be a lot of libraries that you're using in your code base, right? I mean, there are some things that that were not there 10 years ago, for example, because Clojure ecosystem has evolved at a rapid pace. I would say there are new things coming in and new ways of doing things coming in every now and then. So if you see the current stack that you have, current code base that you have, so what would be the ones that you're really dependent on and how they are helping you, running Helpshift?
So we wrote initially we wrote a lot of the libraries ourselves, right? One of the things I feel really bad about is we never open source any of this work. We just wrote enough to solve our problem, and we moved on. And I think this is another thing that a lot of people in Clojure world do. They'll just solve their own tiny little problem and move on. So also the reason why we have so many re-implementations of the same thing, instead of, like, something I've observed in other programming communities is that people they rally behind one framework, or they like something gains critical mass, which I don't think happens in Clojure. For example,
there are certain things, aren't there, like Ring that does that, but I agree.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people will, because it's, I mean, it comes back to the curse of Lisp that we were talking about earlier on, because it is relatively straightforward to implement these things. People don't necessarily want to or be owned by someone else's code, and in fact, there's almost a culture around that of saying, I don't take on a dependency, don't use someone else's code, because there's, I mean, and even these days, in these recent months, the software supply chain bullshit that's coming out, everyone's like, in the Clojure world, it's like, yeah, we told you about that. Don't take other people's code.
Yeah. But then that's the problem. Like, it stops things from being full featured.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So so we wrote those kind of things, but I mean, Ring is something that we cannot I can't imagine
Avoid.
my life without. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same with so we only have Clojure on the back end. I don't have any experience of like Clojure script. When Clojure script came out, our front end engineers evaluated it and they were like, no, we're not going to do it. I think this was in the very initial version of Clojure script.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, at that point,
Yeah.
I think now you have Shadow CLJS and stuff like that. The tooling is a lot better, but it was a hard sell, I think.
Yeah, and also with Reframe, there is, as you were mentioning, like there is a kind of a critical mass around Reframe and this kind of development now, and because there was a time where there was like all these weird ways of wrapping React. Like there are like mushrooms, like there are 20 different libraries showing up. Everybody is thinking, yes, we're doing it slightly differently than other folks, and then that's something kind of gravitated towards one now. We have Reframe and reagent in the back end, and back end of the front end. I mean, so I think that there's kind of a consolidation happening there. But the rest of the places, I think it's always I mean, there is still no, just as you're mentioning, like, there is no Django, there is no Rails, that, entire community is just writing plugins and, following the same pattern everywhere. So there is always, you're between integrant or, slash duct, and then you're between Yada and then something else. And there is always a, choice available, which is a good thing and which is a bad thing. Like
Yeah.
it's a difficult balance to achieve. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we got stuck with component, which like honestly I don't enjoy it very much.
yeah, yeah.
But that's something that we did. And
Yeah.
I'm like, we are looking into integrant now, but
Mm,
component is something that we just have too many things around. So we
mm,
wrote more protocols that component should have by default,
mm.
and then each of our components implements those protocols. So the change is quite significant for us.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah,
I think that's what, as you mentioned before, like once you once you have the product fit, fit, then product market fit, then it is very difficult to justify rewriting code because there is business, there is serious stuff running on top of the code base. Then there is not much happening. But so to oh wow, we're pretty much. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's like past midnight in India. Well, we started past midnight already, so
yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost 2 a.m.
Oh my god.
we don't want to keep you
Okay.
awake forever. But just a few things to before we wrap up. And so I see that you have a Foundation DB library, and
Yeah.
do you guys use Foundation DB in production? Because I heard a lot of good stuff about it, but there is not enough you know reason for me to use it yet. Because still
Uh,
feels like kind of a key value store for me.
it's a key value store
Yeah,
with like full ACID transactions, which is a huge thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, it's amazing. I love Foundation
mm,
DB. I wish we
mm,
would use it in production.
yeah.
So we made the giant mistake. I mean, I can only say this in hindsight. It was great
Yeah,
for us to
of course. When you're
getting
doing it,
started.
you don't know that. Okay, we are gonna make a
Uh,
nice mistake today. Like,
so, so
obviously, it
we
never
invested
starts like that.
heavily. Yeah, we invested heavily in MongoDB.
Yeah.
Um, and we did that during Paisa time. So Paisa's
Mm,
architecture was stock trades coming in, right? So it was
mm,
like just one after the other stock trades, things like that that are happening, and
yeah.
MongoDB made sense in that
Yeah.
context, right?
Mm,
But then we did this. We moved into this
mm,
in-app CRM space, and
mm,
that is a fully relational like
mm,
layout schema. But we
yeah.
stuck with MongoDB, and
Oh.
then we didn't see the problems until we scaled out. I mean, until we
Yeah.
actually started having real customers. And
Mm,
ever since, we've been trying to move away from MongoDB and like giving up on it, right? Like, oh, this is just too much work. It's fine. We'll just stay with what we have.
yeah.
So one of those was Foundation. Like, one of the things that I had explored was Foundation DB, and
Okay.
primary reason for doing that was that it has a fully MongoWire compliant API.
Right.
So you can just, in theory, you can just swap out MongoDB with Foundation DB, and it should just
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
But by that time, we had been bitten enough by, so the majority software that we have Mongo, we have Postgres, we have
Mm,
Elasticsearch, Kafka, Redis. On the product side, this is the majority,
Okay.
and
yeah.
then on the data side, we have Flink and Spark.
Yeah.
So there we had been bitten enough number of times by not having enterprise support. So
Right.
one of the requirements that we had at the architecture level was that anything we choose should have enterprise support, and Foundation
Yeah.
DB doesn't have enterprise support.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the reason why we didn't go ahead with that. But
Mm,
I use it for my personal project. So I have like a personal passion project that I do at home for
mm.
managing my finances. It's a stupid thing. It doesn't need it doesn't need Foundation DB for sure. Like, it could be
Hey,
files.
you won't have scaling problem when you become gazillionaire.
So it
Like
could have been
MongoDB
just,
anymore.
yeah.
It could have
But
been a
I did it because I
SQLite
wanted
thing.
to learn.
You mean?
I mean, SQLite is also like pretty fancy. It could have just been files.
Yeah.
So,
Nice,
but
nice. So, just to wrap up, then, I know there is this enclosure happening. Like there was this. What is it? Is it the Clojure conference in India?
yes.
Yeah. So, how do you guys participate in the community? Do you have any plans to open source, or because I mean, it's one of the I can say that it's one of the most mature Clojure company, right? So you have lots of practices to bring in, you have lots of ideas to
Mm.
bring in. How do you see like things like Clojures together and all these community things happening? Because you're also you have vested interest in having Clojure longevity, right? Like you want to have Clojure programmers available. So how do you see this, and how do you want to participate, or how do you participate already? as a
So
company?
my little rant that I wanted to make on this podcast is you have
Okay.
had so many guests. You should ask them why they are not contributing to Cider and Clojure together. And
Good
e-
point. Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it. We are a really tiny company out of India, and
Mm,
we are the top contributors on Cider as a company. Like we
mm,
have given them the most amount of money. Why? Like,
yeah.
why are there not people who are like Cider is definitely worth that. Like they
Mm,
deserve that money. And
yeah.
Clojure together also. I mean, Clojure
Mm,
together has a lot of people funding them for sure, but
mm,
it
Mm,
could do with more, and
yeah.
that's something that should be done at the very minimum.
Mm.
I mean, if you're doing open source work, then you're already putting your time and whatever
Yes. Yes. You're,
effort
you're
into
already
it. Yeah,
contributing in a different way. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
mm,
So
Yeah.
in Clojure, we organize with Nilenso. Nilenso and us
Mhm.
have been organizing it for the few years that it has been happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very tiny conference at the moment. Um,
Mm,
but we plan to continue doing it. Now in coronavirus, that has completely knocked us out. Like it didn't
yeah.
happen in 2021. It won't happen in
Mm,
2022, I think. Uh,
mm,
but hopefully it'll restart in 2023.
yeah.
And
Do we get a standing invitation to come and podcast from Clojure, from in Clojure?
absolutely,
Live from Clojure.
Exactly. No, it would be great.
absolutely,
that
you get a standing invitation.
that'll be amazing.
Okay.
I think that'll be amazing. I think me and Ray will be showing up there, and Ray and I don't know how do you say that. Is it Ray and I or me and Ray or Ray and
Ray
me?
and I.
Ray and I. Yeah. Okay. So
He's the king of Indian Clojure, so you have to be very careful with your grammar.
I think
it
we'll be
was,
there.
in the films. It was the king and I, So
Yeah, totally. And then we're gonna eat. What's that? Modak again?
Yes,
Um,
Ukdiche Modak.
Ukdiche modak, and then eating that one. People can listen to our ASMR eating, Indian sweets, and then enjoy the podcast from there. So hopefully, things are gonna get better. Well, things will always get better. As we say in India, all is well.
Yeah.
If it is not at the end, then it is not well. It's not the end yet, if it is not well. So there is certainly a bright light at the end of the tunnel. Anyway, on that happy note, thanks a lot, Vedang, for joining us in this crazy hour, and walking us through all this, building a company around Clojure, one of the first companies, and adopting it, and then also I'm gonna double down on helping people to shift into Clojure,
I like that.
kind
I
of
like
thing.
that. That's
Yeah.
nice.
But I
So-
think
so
you're
you-
right. Maybe it's what we should do. We should take a lesson from this, and we don't prepare very much, but we should like write down some like standard questions. What was your journey? Da 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 da. Like VJ likes to do, But also we should say, what was your journey? Why the fuck aren't you paying more money into Cider? And why the hell aren't you paying more money into Clojure together? And what? Yeah.
Why are
So,
you not
yeah,
using Emacs? What the fuck?
But Dan
Yeah.
said
That one
channeling
for
for
sure.
Dang now, So we'll be using your spirit in future podcasts for Dang, that's for sure.
Certainly. Yeah. And yeah, thanks a lot, and a special thanks to Aditya Atalye,
Yeah.
for looping you in and poking us,
yeah.
and hopefully Aditya, you're listening. Thanks a lot for bringing Vedang into the loop. So this has been an amazing episode, and it's really nice to hear from you. And hopefully there will be more and more Clojure opportunities showing up in India, and that will give us a chance to come to India and then eat some Indian sweets, as they say. On that happy note, this is episode number 80, and thanks again, Vedang, for joining us.
All right.
been
Thank
amazing.
you, guys. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Defan. And the awesome vegetarian music, or the track, is Melon Hamburger by Pizzeri. And the show's audio is mixed by Wouter Dullert. I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. Maybe you should insert your own name here, Dullert.
Wouter.
If you'd like to support us, please do check out our Patreon page, and you can show your appreciation to all the hard work or the lack of hard work that we're doing. And you can also catch up with either Ray, with me, for some unexplainable reason. You want to interact with us, then do check us out on Slack, Clojurian Slack or Clojureverse, or on Zulip, or just at us at Defen Podcast on Twitter. Enjoy your day and see you in the next episode.